This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work, responding to another AskProfWolff question from our Patreon community. This question comes from Derek Spear, and it asks how we define a capitalist crash. Good question, basic question, and the kind that too often gets assumed as though everybody understands it in the same way when that isn't the case. First of all, the word crash is meant to be dramatic and stark. It was most often used to discuss the most serious of capitalism's periodic downturns. So, for example, many books were written about the quote-unquote crash of 1929 that ushered in the worst economic downturn that capitalism has so far experienced, although we are now, with COVID and all the rest of it, in something that threatens to be the number one and is already clearly the number two. So the word crash is a little bit dramatic. What does it refer to? Well, here's the reality. The agency in this country, the United States, that keeps track of economic ups and downs is called the National Bureau of Economic Research, usually referred to as the NBER. And they literally track and report on when the economy goes up and when it turns down, when it turns up again, and so on. Capitalism, for the 300 years or so that it's grown from its base in England to become the worldwide system we have today, wherever it has gone, has had recurring downturns. Very important to understand. First, what are they? Well, they are fairly sudden drops in the level of activity. I mean sudden, and I mean drop. Millions of people, say in the United States, are suddenly thrown out of work in a matter of weeks or months. Large numbers of businesses cut back the production that they normally would undertake. Many of them lay off workers as a result, hence the unemployment. Many businesses, particularly medium and small ones, go belly up, declare bankruptcy, stop functioning altogether. Because many people are unemployed and because many businesses have either cut back or closed, the flow of tax revenue to local, regional, and federal governments dries up, so that you quickly see a cutting back of government services just when people need them more because so many are unemployed. In other words, it's a depression, it's a recession, it's a downturn, it's a crisis, it's a bust. A lot of words for these sudden downturns. The NBER history shows every 4 to 7 years, as the average, every 4 to 7 years, there is this sudden downturn. Now, it's an average, so sometimes it'll happen sooner and sometimes it'll take longer. So, for example, in the first 20 years of this century, we've had three. One in the spring of 2000, usually called the dot-com crisis, or the dot-com crash, if you like. Then another one in 2008, the so-called subprime mortgage crisis, and now the COVID-19 crisis. Three crises, 20 years, you see the 4 to 7 year average. However, some crises are short and shallow, and they don't get the word crash applied to them because they don't cut very deep, they don't lay off that many, they don't destroy that many businesses, so they are mildly referred to. It's a recession rather than the deeper, longer-lasting depression. The word crash tends to be reserved for the bad ones, like the one in 1929 that lasted throughout the 1930s, and the one that we're going through now, partly because this one is so bad since it happens or occurs together with a severe viral pandemic. It's as if we were living through capitalism's worst nightmare, that one of its periodic downturns would coincide in time and place with another social crisis, in this case a health crisis, producing the kind of disaster we are living through, and that's why it's called a crash. There are technical metrics that are used. For example, if you have a decrease in the quantity of goods and services produced, your GDP, for 2 consecutive quarters of a year here in the United States, that's the official definition of a recession. If the downturn only lasts 1 quarter, it's not a recession. It's then a downturn. But these words are vague. They are differently used by different approaches, different thinkers, different writers. So I wouldn't get too lost in the words. Basically, crash is when you want to stress that this is one of those capitalist downturns that's worse than most in terms of the number of people hurt, the number of businesses hurt, how long it lasts, what its social consequences are. I hope that answers your question. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work, thanking our Patreon community.